Good afternoon. Welcome to Hillside Sunday School, which also is broadcast both on Facebook for those in the Sunday school that desire it. And then also we have people from my YouTube page joining us. So that's really exciting. It looks like we have two people on Periscope. Hang in there, hang out with us. That's absolutely wonderful. We're in Leviticus, so I'm going to get started now. People may end up chiming in, and I welcome that. But I'm going to begin now. We won't have, it looks like, any Hillsiders at all from the actual Sunday school, but this has become kind of a remote Sunday school that includes other communities. And so I'm excited to have people there. And some of you folks who are joining us from other locations are actually more faithful than some of the folks from Hillside. Now, a shout out to Daniel Zoff, who is busy doing the Christmas box outreach that my wife is also a part of at the church, and they are getting things ready to send out shoe boxes, which is really neat, to kids in need. Usually they'll have some gifts in them. In years past, we had a hand in packing them. We send thousands of those through Samaritan's Purse to the central location, and they go out. And so that's really exciting. So Daniel will not be here, but for very, very good reasons, ministry-wise. And so I'll miss him, but I'm glad he's doing what he's doing. It is good that those kids get a little something special. And yes, there is some testimony or gospel material left in those things, not left in those things, put in those things so that they can find out about the greatest gift of all, which is our Messiah, Jesus. And so I'm excited about that. There may be others from the Sunday school who decide to chime in. This is a Zoom meeting. So in the chat, if you would like to actually go ahead and chime in. I have a question here from Dan Barrow. Which is your preference, New Testament or Old? It's kind of hard to divide up my Bible. I have a passionate love for the Old Testament. I believe that what is called the Old Testament, or Tanakh in Hebrew, creates the foundation by which God could reveal in a greater fullness the doctrines related to his relationship to humankind and the way he would like us to bear his image. And so I see it as one great big story, but I think the beginning of the story is in what's called the Tanakh, which is often called the Old Testament, and then it carries over. I think what I really love are the connections between the two, looking at the whole story and seeing the connections and seeing what they would have understood and how it points to the greater truth that really brings the greater truth that the whole story points to. So Paul Burrow, who is actually on Periscope, thank you for that question, Paul. If you have other questions as we go along, please put them in the box. I will go ahead and address them. And if you're watching Periscope, you should be able to hear my answers. And I read the questions. So if there are others who can't necessarily see those questions, they can indeed hear those questions and hear my responses. We are in Leviticus 25. We should be right there. We finished the Feast of Israel. We're going to be dealing with some really neat stuff. Now, I always share the PowerPoint. And so I hope you don't mind being able to see the PowerPoint. Also, the PowerPoint is available. I generally post these PowerPoints so that you can have them. And so I'm going to go to share screen mode and put that PowerPoint up so that it can be shared and you can see it. Sometimes the fonts will get a little small, particularly with the Hebrew. And that's one of the many reasons why I share the PowerPoint. The PowerPoint can be gotten through Zion's Banner on Facebook, through Patreon, because I do teaching during the week that is not of this Sunday school. And those are two locations. This particular PowerPoint is not up at the moment because it is a Sunday school, and I generally pre-post my weekly stuff, which is one is an apologetics teaching that is exegetical, that relates directly to the Bible, and then the other has been a study through the Gospel of Matthew. So if you do not see that PowerPoint now, that's simply because I did not pre-post it, but it can be made available. So just let me know uh, if that is of interest, and I will post that on uh, Microsoft OneDrive with a link, and you can download that at your leisure. This whole series has been called Adventures in Leviticus. And so if you've not joined us before, we've been going through Leviticus. Now, there is always a take-home truth. That's courtesy of my preaching pastor, preaching teacher, actually, not my pastor, when I was in seminary, who said you need a take-home truth so that if they walk away with nothing other than that take-home truth, they will indeed walk away with the essence of what you want to convey. And so that practice has stuck with me. And even in my apologetic stuff, when I'm doing it on my own station, I like to leave some sort of practical take home truth so that we can put this to work in several areas at once. Last week's take home truth is don't break what doesn't belong to you. Sacred things belong to God, and we must not defame them. So that was last week's take home truth. Now, let's talk about this. This is a section of scripture that has more than one pericope to it. It's a word I use a lot. I learned it in seminary. There is a structure, and the chapter divisions are not always where the structure ends up changing. And so you might have a general topic, you might have a breakdown of that topic. We saw that when it dealt with the regulations around leprosy. There was leprosy of people, leprosy of garments, leprosy of buildings. And so those divisions that occur in the text create these pericopes, and we want to look at things in pericopes. Now, generally, I will only do one pericope a week, but that's not necessarily true. It depends on the length of the pericope and what's being discussed. This particular thing, particular section, shouldn't say thing, is more than one pericope. So let's start digging in. Shout out to Slam RN. And she just got out of another Zoom Bible study right into a Zoom Bible study. So I am thrilled that she is here. We are going to start looking at the text. Now, what I generally do is look at the text first, and then we break it down. That way, you've at least seen the text. If you were in your Bibles, you'd be looking at Leviticus 25, 1 through 7. You can see it up on the screen. I try to break the text down if there are several panels, but I have to admit, I like to get as much Bible text on a slide as I can. So that's where things are at. This is the actual text from Leviticus 25, 1 through 7, which forms our first pericope. And the Lord spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land which I give you, then the land shall keep a Sabbath to the Lord. 6 years you shall sow your field, 6 years you shall prune your vineyard and gather in its fruit, and in the 7th year it shall be a Sabbath of solemn rest for the land, a Sabbath to the Lord. You shall neither sow your field nor prune your vineyard. What grows on its own of your harvest you shall not reap, nor gather the grapes of your untended vines. For it is a year of rest for the land, and the Sabbath produce of the land shall be food for you. For you, your male and female servants, your hired man, your stranger who dwells with you, for your livestock and beasts that are in your land. All its produce shall be food." Now, what we're talking about is the sabbatical year for the land. There are several ways to do this. Crop rotation was used a lot in this country to go ahead and do the same thing. The land will become depleted of nutrients. Now, this is not a time where they had a lot of fertilizer options. God decides, since it's his land, he doesn't want it wrecked. And so he's going to give them a provision. And we're going to see how this provision works and what it means and what we can take from that. And then from there, I think we believe we're going to have the opportunity to touch on the year of Jubilee, which is one of the most fantastic things and one of the neatest pictures related to Messiah that you will find. This is a little small. It's from a commentary. It's Kyle and Delich. They are one of the classic commentaries on the Old Testament. They tend to be a little on the scholarly side, somewhat wordy. but they make some great points about the Hebrew and the sections. So I'm going to go ahead and increase this a little bit in size. The Babylonian exile of Israel was in part a punishment for not obeying the sabbatical year for the land. They comment on this. Now, I highlighted the section, bolded it, that has the most to do with it. But in their lead-in, they point out that the period was to come to an end with the rise of the Persians. Remember, you have the Babylonian captivity, and then the Babylonian Empire is taken over by what is called the Medo-Persian Empire, which gets replaced by the Greek Empire, which gets replaced by the Roman Empire. It's characterized by the clause, and there you have it. Okay. And it's a little small in Hebrew, but that first word is od. It has the idea of until often. And then you have the next word there, which is a little hard in the vowel markings, but it looks like Ritz ta vigoi is the phrase that looks to be there. And it's characterized by that clause. So they're just pointing out that clause is there is a time of expiation. Now that's fancy in terms of punishment, propitiation and expiation of the wrong which had been done to the land. Now this is where that starts to tie into this section. By the non-observance of the sabbatical years upon the basis of the threatening in Leviticus 26:34. We're not quite there yet, but there'll be more material that will touch on this, in which the wasting of the land during the dispersion of the unrepentant people among the heathen. This is Kyle and Delich. Okay, so we're getting a little New King Jamesian here. So I'm not, that's why you see the word heathen. I would have preferred nations, was represented as a compensation for the neglect did Sabbaths from the passage of the law. The words are taken to show that the Lord had inflicted the punishment with which the disobedient people had been threatened as early as the time of Moses. It is not to be translated until the land has made up its years of rest. And they're just pointing out the linguistic, but until the land has enjoyed its Sabbath. And so they're pointing out the linguistics there. The bottom line is that one of the reasons given for this Babylonian captivity, quite frankly, is because this law was not followed. And so the land does indeed get its Sabbaths during the Babylonian captivity, and God makes sure that that ends up happening. But they're just making the connection that I'm making for you. This particular sabbatical year was binding on everybody in the land. That included male and female servants, hired hands, and the stranger who dwells among you. Often the Bible will translate that as sojourner. It's the Hebrew word gar, for your livestock and for your beasts. So this was a comprehensive law that if you were in the land at all, you had to follow this and you had to obey this. Now the question comes up, and it was something that occurred to me: if you're not reaping your crops and you're not, dealing with the untended stuff, then what are you going to eat? I mean, you have a whole year here. Your animals have to eat, you have to eat. Fasting for a year is just not an option. And really, Kyle and Delich point this out. The produce of the sabbatical year that grew without cultivation was available for food. But we're going to see another provision of God to take care of this. So you could not cultivate and harvest systematically, but the food that was produced through non-cultivated growing was available for food. The meaning is that you didn't do a harvesting or an organized reaping. Okay. They were to eat of the land whatever grew naturally. The produce arising without tilling, sowing, was to be common food for man and beast. So it was not as though God did not leave them a provision. We're going to see there's another provision there. But what was not to happen was the usual harvesting and cultivating of the grapevines. And so there was some food available. And Kyle and Delich is just making this clear in case someone had the same question that naturally occurs. So what was to happen here during this time period was that they were indeed supposed to leave the land to grow naturally. It doesn't mean anything didn't grow. We had a garden. We left it fallow, I think, 1 year, and stuff did come up. And so that's what you're dealing with. Now, that is the sabbatical year from the land, and it was disobeyed. And so God ended up giving Israel an exile of exactly 70 years. Remember that it's every 7 years that this is supposed to occur. And since it was not done, the land enjoyed its Sabbaths as Israel was out of the land. God really taking care of his land. Again, we have crop rotation, and we do that, particularly in the South. One of the reasons that peanuts became a big thing is that peanuts and your legumes were a way of bringing nitrogen back into the soil. So there are plants that take nitrogen from the air and produce the nitrogen compounds necessary to fertilize the soil. And they're a particular type of plant, one of the few that can grab nitrogen from the air. And so what ends up happening here is, just to give you the mechanics, Israel didn't have really that sort of system in place. And so God's going to take care of his land. And so when Israel didn't take care of and was not a good steward of God's land, God pushed the issue. Now, there are some other reasons they ended up in Babylonia that are not directly related to this, but this is part of the reason that they are in Babylonia for that 70 years. Let's get to one of the neatest features. One of the really cool messianic pictures in the story here. This is the year of Jubilee. You shall count out seven Sabbaths of years. Now that's 49 years. 7 times 7 years, until the time of the 7 Sabbaths of years shall be to you 49 years. So I know this sounds a little complicated here, but he's stressing the number of years. Then you shall cause a trumpet, the trumpet of Jubilee, to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month. Now, don't miss this. This is Yom Kippur. You shall make the trumpet sound throughout the land. You shall consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout all the land to all of its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you, and each one of you shall return to his possession, and each one of you shall return to his family. The 50th year shall be a jubilee to you. You shall neither sow nor reap what grows of its. Okay, I'm just making sure that I've read this right. In it, you shall neither sow nor reap what grows of its own accord, nor gather grapes of the untended vine. So this is a specialization of the sabbatical year that is unique. And this is why this is included in this section, because you have the general sabbatical year, and then you have this special year of Jubilee. Yes, the year of Jubilee started with the Day of Atonement. So Slam RN is noting that the 7th day of the 10th day of the 7th month. So the evening starts Yom Kippur, you have the year of Jubilee beginning. Now we're going to point out why this is really kind of significant, but I want to introduce the idea that this starts on the Day of Atonement. It's a specialized. Each of you shall return to your own possession. If you sell anything to your neighbor or buy anything from your neighbor's hand, you shall not oppress one another according to the number of years after the Jubilee. You shall buy from your neighbor according to the number of years of crops he shall sell to you. According to the multitude of years, you shall increase its price, and according to the fewer years, you shall diminish its price. For he who sells to you according to the number of years of the crops. Therefore, you shall not oppress one another, but you shall fear the Lord your God. I am the Lord your God. Now, what's going on here is a forgiveness of debts. They did not have bankruptcy. What they had was a forgiveness of debt. Now, in payment of debt, if you were destitute, you could sell your land. You might even end up as an indentured servant to pay off a debt. And so those were the sort of economic means that were set up, and God strictly regulated these systems, because the idea of being in debt and being enslaved was not unknown in the Mideastern world. And God actually did is he brought goodness to those systems. Now, they are not the optimum systems. I run into neo-atheists all the time, and they pick on these sections. I say, well, wait a minute. What you don't understand is your 20th century morality came from the very worldview that you're slamming, and that these people were not operating in a world like your world. They were operating in a world that was far crueler, far harsher, far more unkind, and less enlightened. And so what God took is took the systems of the nations around them, gave them laws uniquely so that they would be different, and in so doing, mitigated some of the evils that were associated with some of the practices. Now, some practices he just cut out, but this was an economic practice because you couldn't just have people owing and not paying. So there had to be an economic means of dealing with this. Now, God sets up something very neat here. He sets up a year in which all debts are canceled, a year of forgiveness from debt. But now the temptation is to figure out when the year of Jubilee is and manipulate the price, because you know you're only going to have the land for so long. So you have 3 years till the year of Jubilee, but you charge the price for 7 years. Well, that wasn't totally cool. Or in buying, I could figure out that I have 3 years from the year of Jubilee, 1 year from the year of Jubilee, and try to manipulate that. And so to prevent either side from manipulating this blessed provision of forgiveness, God indeed says you shall not oppress one another. Side note, God considers economic oppression a form of oppression. And so God sets this whole thing up. And so you have that section. Now we're going to see this ties into a wonderful picture of God's ultimate Jubilee. You do need to know that the indentured servant now could return to the possession that belonged to his family and end up in a position where he might have land. Understand that in the ancient world, land was wealth. In fact, when this country began, the vision of the founding fathers is that everybody could be a landowner. Now, understand in Europe, that didn't exist. Lords owned land, serfs worked the land, and then paid tribute to their overlords, as well as taxes to the king. And so if I was back in England during a certain time period and I was a serf, I basically was working. Now, if I was a serf, I was actually indentured or in slavery. So I had very few rights. If I was a freeman, I might have rights, but I don't have land. And so now I'm like a tenant farmer as opposed to an indentured slave. But the point of this is that freedom was given every 50 years. That allowed people not to have to remain landless in perpetuity if their family fell on hard times. And the goal of our founding fathers coming from Europe, one of their goals was to allow every citizen to have land, so that it was not an elite class of individuals that were landowners. And so people could actually own their houses. But the cottage of a serf or the cottage of a vassal belonged to his liege lord under the feudal system. And so, if you're watching Upstairs, Downstairs or something from BritBox, you will see that servants of a great household really were really had to answer to their lord or the staff over them. This is not what this is all about. Under this, one could become landed again, even if one had lost land. But what's really cool is it's out of this passage that the very phrase on our Liberty Bell comes. I laugh at people that will say this country does not have a Judeo-Christian heritage. On our Liberty Bell is contained a verse right from this section, right from Leviticus, I have a picture of the Liberty Bell there. I hope you all can see it. Of course, at the bottom, you have the name of the guys who, indeed cast the bell. If you're a National Treasure fan, you will recognize Pass and Stowe, Philadelphia in the year. And above, you have the Leviticus 25, and then the verse number 10, proclaim liberty throughout the land to all the inhabitants thereof. And what the founding fathers did was pull this very verse out of Leviticus. They understood the connection between the year of Jubilee and the release of debt and freedom. And so they placed an Old Testament or verse from the Hebrew Tanakh on the Liberty Bell. Did the Bible influence American history? Yeah, at its very foundations. And so that's what the Liberty Bell looks like. The side with the crack is not facing you. But there is a side in which a crack formed in the Liberty Bell, and it was later replaced by another bell because they didn't want to keep having the clapper hit the bell and have that crack go up the bell, and eventually the structure of the bell would fail. Okay. Throughout the land, the trumpet was sounded. That was the signal that this ended up taking place. Interestingly enough, you have the trumpet associated with Rosh Hashanah and the end of the season of awe, Yom Kippur. The bottom line is, in the ancient world, physical debt and forgiveness of moral debt were two sides of the same coin. If I owed you, I had a moral obligation to pay that debt off. And whether that debt was purely financial or was moral in nature, I was still indebted or owing. This explains the Old English King James, forgive us our debts as we forgive those who are debtors. I don't do much King James, okay? As we forgive our debtors. The Lord's Prayer, Old King James, because debtor meant any sort of moral obligation. In fact, our word indebted to you means that I have an obligation. So if I say to someone, I'm indebted to you, I'm admitting some sort of interpersonal obligation to that person. Now, not only does that obligation have to be paid off, you can be indebted to people now without having to pay off an obligation, but that's where our word indebted comes from. And they viewed it as two sides of the same coin. God is trying in the year of Jubilee, tying the year of Jubilee to forgiveness from financial debt, as well as a picture of forgiveness of sin. Do you see that? Since financial debt and moral debt were connected, forgiveness is pictured by both the remitting of a financial debt and the remitting of moral debt. I think it's a matter of what I started memorizing in. When I became a believer, I had access to a Gideon Bible. That Gideon Bible happened to be in the New King James. And so I began memorizing my verses in New King James. I will tell you this. When we took Hebrew, we had to compare various translations. And so I found that the NASB was very good to the Hebrew. Now, at that time, I only had certain options. We only looked at like the NIV, the NASB, and the King James. The New King James was available, but really had not circulated much. The NIV was being used a lot, and the NASB. I found the King James and the NASB to be accurate to the Hebrew in different ways. The problem with the King James that the New King James addresses in a central column is the issue of texts. And so when the King James was written, the Dead Sea Scrolls did not exist, and a lot of material textually just was not available. And so the King James has variant readings that may not be the best choice just because of the availability of texts at the time. We have been blessed with the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which God uniquely and specially by his divine providence preserved. We have also found other material that are legitimate scripture kept by Jewish communities in Alexandria and a few other places. And so these have expanded our knowledge of the manuscript and the way things are. So by memory and convenience, I have stuck with the New King James. I have gotten to look at a few other versions. I think I was looking at the Christian, what is it? It's like the Holman. And I found it pretty good. I have a copy of it up there. I was least liked the NIV. While it may catch the thought of a verse, it plays a little bit less. It's not a true translation. It's what's called a dynamic equivalent. And it's a little bit heavy on the dynamic equivalent. Just to kind of help, there's a range. This is a very literal translation. This is a dynamic equivalent. A literal translation does word to word, but it doesn't always it's kind of wooden and doesn't always catch the nuance of a phrase as well. And then you have the dynamic equivalent that catches the idea of the verses, but it isn't as worried about the accuracy to the single word. I think you're best somewhere. I like to be closer to a literal than a dynamic equivalent. So habits die hard. I still tend to rely on the New King James, paying attention to the central column, and then going back to the Targums and the Hebrew text. And that's the beauty. If you have Logos, you can have the parallel Greek text interlinear in English and the original language and see how the words match up. And so then you can get a finer look at, how did the translator come to this? Yes, that's what it is. The Holman Christian Standard Bible. I do have it. I found it to be pretty good. It was just hard reading a verse I had memorized and then trying to memorize it in a different translation. I found that difficult. It's like I would quote from one or quote from the other. So that's along about. I use the King James out of just habit. Okay. The NASB is very good. The ESV, I haven't found any major problems with it. I just generally avoid the NIV. I avoid Good News for Modern Man. Some of those. The Amplified Bible, I like devotionally because it expands out the meaning of the words. So it's great for like scripture meditation, where you look at you have the verse and then you have in parentheses, the range of meanings of that particular key word. And that's handy for scripture meditation and to force you to think about the verse and then to start making application. Like you do, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Then in parentheses, have no need, require anything more than, that sort of thing. And that's good for scripture meditation. By the way, so is sentence diagramming and block diagramming. If you want a great devotional exercise, think about the parts of speech when you're reading a verse and then start thinking about that. God so loved. Who loved? God loved. What did God do? He loved. Whom did God love? What is the object of God's love? The world. What is the demonstration of God's love? That he gave. What is the thing that God gave as his tangible demonstration of his love? His son. What is the reason that God gave? So you can do that as a form of scripture meditation. And then think about each section of that. So that's all about. Okay. I digress, but I can do that because I'm having a fun conversation. And then people who tune in later can just enjoy the dialogue. Let's talk about Messiah in the year of Jubilee. This is so fun. Okay. I am doing a thing here. If you're looking at the PowerPoint, noticing almost the exact same Hebrew phrase in two places. Why do I think Messiah is our Jubilee? Well, grammatically, something really neat happens here. Okay. The word proclaim liberty is in mine. Now, in the light violet, you will see the Hebrew phrase for proclaim liberty. What you will notice is almost the exact same phrase. Now you're saying, well, Jeff, it's not the exact same phrase. The same concept represented by the same root Hebrew words. Okay, you got two words. By the root of both Hebrew words is there. So you have a little different wording, but you have the same concept using the same root words in two separate places. Now let's look at this. You shall proclaim liberty throughout the land, Bikaratam, and then, the idea of the land. That's the word to call, to summon. In this sense, it's being used in declare. When you get to Isaiah 61:6, watch what happens here. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, speaking of Messiah, because the Lord has anointed me, and that's the very verbal form of the word Messiah, to preach glad tidings to the poor, because he sent me to heal the brokenhearted and to proclaim liberty to the captives. Now, when I get to proclaim liberty, you have that same root word kara. It's represented slightly differently. And then you have to the captives, but it's and the opening of prison to those who are bound. But what you see is the same Hebrew word here. And so you have the same basic Hebrew the same Hebrew phrase, and I will do that. Susan, okay. I couldn't tell that from I could tell that from Facebook, but some people like to use their YouTube moniker and they don't want their real name used. So I now feel the freedom without creating an unintended offense. So thank you for that. Some people just don't like their name. The point is, I can link Messiah's mission here in Isaiah 6:1 to the year of Jubilee back here in Leviticus. So I'm not making a connection concept-wise that any other Hebrew speaker or reader could not make. And that's why I did that, to point out that there's a linguistic conceptual connection between Leviticus and Messiah as the Jubilee. And so you've seen the cross reference there. Now, Isaiah uses this. So watch where we go. We go from Leviticus, where almost the same phrase, but the same concept is there, in Isaiah 61:6 to Luke, where Jesus applies this to himself. So you have messianic prophecy in Isaiah, you have its application to Messiah in Luke, and you have the year of Jubilee, which connects to those two things. And we would say that once I hit Luke, I'm doing something called intertextuality, where I'm looking at both texts and I'm seeing the cross threads, the one big story. So Messiah is our Jubilee. I'm not the first person to catch this. I used to, and I would say I still do, but I hear less of his music coming out. Michael Card was one guy I used to love because he spent a lot of time in the Old Testament, the Tanakh, the Hebrew Scriptures. And he would write songs about these pictures of truth and Messiah in the Tanakh, the Hebrew Scriptures, or the Old Testament. And I remember a great song, and I wanted to play it, but I knew this was going on YouTube, and that would be copyright infringement. And I do not want to go ahead and do that to Michael Card or have YouTube remind me that I was being slightly unkind. But I felt free, since the lyrics were posted on YouTube, to at least read the lyrics to you. I would encourage you, if you want some fun, it is on YouTube. The song is available. I can't use it, but that doesn't mean you can't hear it. The word provided for a time for slaves to be set free, for the debts of all to be canceled, so his chosen one could see. His deep desire was for forgiveness, and he longed to see their liberty. This yearning was embodied in the year of Jubilee. And then, of course, you have the wonderful singing here, where Jubilee is repeated twice. Jesus is that Jubilee. Debts forgiven, slaves set free. Jesus is our Jubilee. At the Lord's appointed time, his deep desire to give a man the heart of true jubilation and the joy we understand. In his voice, we hear the trumpet sound that tells us we are free. He is the incarnation of the year of Jubilee. And the hairs on the back of my neck are literally going up a little bit. This is it. It's finding Jesus and making much of Jesus in the big story. Jesus is the incarnation, the embodiment of the year of Jubilee, and it was done or started on the Day of Atonement so that forgiveness of sin and forgiveness of debt would be connected in the mind of the people and eventually embodied in the person of Messiah. Now, that is the place where I live. That's the place where my heart pounds. These sorts of things. Now, I have to admit that the average Jewish person knows little or nothing about the year of Jubilee, which is truly sad. For while trying to keep the Sabbath and the minutiae of the law, even among the Orthodox, there is little appreciation for the year of Jubilee, because we no longer live in the land and we no longer live under the same theocracy. But in Jesus, see, this is where the veil is lifted and they see the glory of God in Messiah. When a Jewish person comes to Messiah and is taught this, the beautiful connection takes their mind back to the place in the Torah, and they can see where the Torah itself pointed to Messiah. And I've heard so many unsaved Jewish people saying, well, Jesus' name isn't in the Torah, but Jesus' person is embodied in the regulations of the Torah. And so we no longer do the year of Jubilee. We live and are united to the embodiment of the year of Jubilee if we are in Messiah. And that is just incredible. Again, no financial oppression. God never wants what he intended for good to be used for evil, which, by the way, is what mankind often does. Evil is the twisting or privation of good, and so people will make money off of anything. Yes. And I don't know if I have the album with it or not, but that's like a phone keeper. That is just an incredible song. My wife got to meet him. I was ministering that night. I would have had such talks with him. In fact, he said that he would have loved to have met me and sat down and talked, because he just, we would have found some real fun common ground, even though I'm not musical. Theologically, we would have found some fun common ground. Men will commercialize anything. Anything good can be turned to the use of power or possession. By the way, those are the three that we need to be careful of. Okay, unguided passion, power, and possession are really where people get hung up. They don't start there, but those are the roads. Okay, those are paths to the dark side. And so God put provision in so people could not misuse that which was good for evil, knowing that people are really creative inventors of evil. And so we kind of talked about that. You're not going to use this to oppress your neighbor financially by engaging in financial practices, using the year of Jubilee as a lever to cheat your neighbor. But now, wait a minute. I'm doing this, but how do I know enough wild crops will grow for me to be able to live? I'm taking a risk here. I'm not cultivating my ground. I'm not harvesting. I'm not tending to my grapevines. I am taking a bit of a risk. I'm not just rotating crops. I'm actually not touching the land. Well, there's an encouragement that God gives to the people of Israel because they had to operate by faith. To do this sort of practice, you have to believe that God is going to provide. You have to operate by faith. Law keeping is not the central message of Tanakh. This is where modern Judaism, whatever branch, makes its mistake. Is the emphasis is on the belief in the book, not the belief in the author. Now, they don't intend to do this. Okay, it's a fine line, but you could see how trusting the in the rules could become sort of like a magic talisman. I did this, God must do that. And you can see where the cause and effect that God used to bless Israel and to chastise Israel could become an end in itself. And so they had to trust God. And the central message, more and more, that I see of Tanakh is trusting God. And so God gives them an encouragement under this sort of system. If you shall observe my statutes and judgments and perform them, you shall dwell in the land in safety, and the land shall yield its fruit. You shall eat your fill and dwell there in safety. And if you say, what shall we eat in the 7th year, since we did not sow or gather our produce? We're afraid not enough's going to be there. I shall command a blessing on you in the 6th year, and it shall bring forth produce enough for 3 years. You shall sow in the 8th year, and you shall eat the produce until the 9th year, until its produce comes, and you shall eat the old harvest. Now, what is God saying here? There is a time delay that is built in here. If I don't go ahead and tend to my crops that year and try to live off of what the land produces, I then have to till the soil and wait for another harvest, which creates an even longer delay. So I can't go from that year directly into a full harvest. And so I have this time delay. God said, I'll take care of the time. I'll do more than make sure you have the food that wildly comes up. I will make sure, I will command a blessing in the 6th year, and you will be able to store it so that you can go from that 6th year to that 9th year, knowing that you have enough. But you're still going to have to trust me. God would take care of it not only through the growing of the land, but through an overabundance that would take them through the sabbatical year. So they would have enough provision. You're guaranteed enough provision. They had to exercise the faith, though. God wouldn't command that blessing for an individual that wouldn't exercise the faith. Now, it's the same for today. There are tons and tons of things that tell us that if we give to the Lord, he will take care of us. There are things that tell us to be generous with our giving on the basis that God can replenish. We are in the same boat, in a sense. Maybe we don't feel it as dramatically because we have grocery stores around us. But one lesson we can learn from this particular season we've been through is that what an ample supply can become a shortage very quickly. And so we're in the same boat. The believer has to trust God's provision. In a sense, every believer is living by faith. I was talking to my dad. And I said to my dad, everyone lives by faith. The question is, faith in what? The man who is as scientific as possible is no less living by faith. He thinks he's living by pure rationality, but he is not living by pure rationality. The materialist and the empiricist are living as much by faith as anyone else is. Because when you look into the microscope, how do you know that your eyes are telling you what's really there, or they're not just false impulses that your brain is receiving? There are such things as optical illusions. Magicians rely on them. When I see the elephant disappear, am I seeing an elephant disappear in a magic trick? We rely on our senses, but our senses themselves have to be trusted. I'm not saying don't trust them. I'm saying you're exercising faith in the rationality of your senses and the universe every time you think that you are making every time you're making an observation. And so you are operating by faith. The children of Israel had to operate by faith. All of us, in a sense, have to operate by faith. But the faith the children of Israel were to operate by was faith in the Lord God. Well, I think we're reaching our take-home truth. It might be a little early. I have to be on Ring, so I'm going to be on with Anthony Rogers tonight, and so that will be in a few hours. And so if this is a little shorter Sunday school, we've reached the end of the pericope. Also, when I looked at the pericopes and I looked at what comes next, it's the whole section on redemption of property and lending to the poor. And I felt that those sections themselves needed treatment separately. So I didn't want to get into the next pericope or pericopes this time. So actually we'll be picking up. From there, and then dealing with more in this section. And then we'll deal with the laws dealing with slavery. And we'll have to deal with the issues of ethics that are often pointed out in having the Bible allowing slavery. We'll have to touch on that. What's our take-home truth? Those who exercise faith in God in all areas of life will find God taking care of them. It's the Ministry to Muslims channel. I can try and pull up the URL and put it in the conversation. Let me do this. I thought he put it up in the Facebook, but I'm trying right now to bring that up for you. Anthony will do a great job. He just came off of a debate with Ali Shabir. He was brilliant beyond all reason. Last time I did a lot of the talking. This time he might do more of the talking. Every Sunday. Here we go. Let me do this. Engaging the followers of Islam is what it's called. I will put the URL up there for you. And that will give you the URL. So Anthony will probably be doing a little bit more of the speaking than I'm doing. But that's okay. I'll still be there. I'll still be active. I'll still be involved. And I will still have some things that I really want to see make sure get shared. So tonight, I don't know, my kids have bumped into Doctor Who. You will have the 3 doctors. So that's up there tonight. That is at 5 o'clock California time, which I believe is 6 o'clock Arizona time. And then I would have to calculate backward in time. So feel free to join. It's a Zoom meeting. Questions are taken and stuff happens. You'll get some really good material. Oh, that's right. I think Susan, you told me you had the link already. So I didn't need to give that to you. Sorry. That's just the easiest way for me to find stuff because it's a Zoom meeting. And you need the link to click on the magic Zoom link. And it's really not Zoom. It's called Ring, which was invented by Zoom, but was like a precursor to Zoom. So that link will take you to the link that you click to get on the Zoom meeting. Because without the Ring Central link, you can't join the meeting. So it's not on a website somewhere. It's a live streaming of like a Zoom meeting like this was. And so sorry if I'm being repetitious, but that's where it is. And that's the only place you can get the link. And Ring isn't like Zoom. You really have to have the link. I could have put the link for the Ring Central in there, but I don't know that would work that way. I think you have to click it from the page. So Okay. Well, I'm going to stop the screen share so that I can get back on here. This is where we're at for this week. News. Wednesday will be Thursday because Thursday is spend time with your family, of course. I will be going to California. There may be some changes in broadcast schedule. I will be on radio stations and podcasts as well as speaking in several congregations. I'm really excited. This is a woman who hosts a show called On the Road with Jesus. Oh, you didn't have the link or the password? Okay, I'm going to try this. I think it might work, but I don't know how George did this, and I just went to the wrong place. Hold on. Well, I know that the link works. I found out for my very own that the link works. I'm going to put the actual link for the meeting, and I don't see a password. But if you're by phone, you're different. So I don't know if you're using a phone or you're using a computer. This will work for the computer. There's an ID number for the phone and a number. So there you go. Hey, when you come in, say hi. Tell them how you found out about it, or maybe the different ways you found out about it, because you probably knew about it before. And on that page is also the schedule, so you'll know who's what. And George is putting together quite a teaching team with this. So, but I am excited. On the Road with Jesus, and road is spelled like Rhodey's name. So, excellent. Well, in a little bit, I'm supposed to try and get a little dinner set for the kids before I go on with Anthony Rogers, and then it'll be kickback time. So that's my Sunday. I trust God's blessing yours. Susan, you already had 2 Bible studies in. Okay. You are well informed. See, you're already hooked into Anthony. So you are there. And so this will also hook you into George. George has a few other people on than Anthony. You saw it via the debate, but you may be unaware of some of the people that he has on, or it may expose you to some of their material on topics you weren't aware they had done. So that's even better. Wednesday, Matthew. Thursday, Turkey Day. I will be posting stuff related on the schedule in California. And God bless. And I'm going to go maybe take a little break and then get ready to see how our barbecue works tonight. So I'm just typing real quick here. Thanks for being here, Susan. You're the only member, and you're the distance Sunday school class, because nobody from the real one can make it. Somebody was busy, and other folks are just doing what they're doing. So glad to have you aboard. Good afternoon. Sorry about the misspelling. Oh, there we go. Oh, well, there you go. I didn't even know Sam Shamoon's last name. I know Al Fadi. I met Dave Wood, and Sam Shamoon and I did a joint broadcast that's actually on my YouTube related to the Trinity. So excellent. You know all the major players here. Excellent. Well, again, I'm going to just put see you soon. Have a blessed Thanksgiving. Probably see you Wednesday, but if I don't, and Thursday, just enjoy.